Hello and welcome everyone to another episode of webinars on Hashnode. Today we have a very special guest with me who is also a friend, and today is all about technical writing, developer experience, documentation, and we'll also see our newest product, Docs by Hashnode. So I am very excited because I have my friend with me, and I'll also be showing you the product around. So I hope by the end of this webinar, you get some learnings and takeaways. And that's it for this week. We'll have a very fun banter between me and I'll just introduce you to the guest in just a few minutes, but it's going to be a lot of fun. And we also hope that by the end of it, you get to learn something. So here on stage, we have Vincent. Hi, Vincent. How are
Hello,
you?
hello, hello, everyone. How are you doing?
Good. How early is it for you? What time is it?
Oh, let me get my mic closer. It's not that early. It's 10:30 in the morning. It's early for me because I don't
Okay.
wake up, but
Yes, same. I start my mornings around 10 a.m. and I only start working from 10:30 or 11 a.m. So I get you on that.
the problem isn't that I start at 10 a.m. The problem is that like I start feeling sleepy at 11:30 now, which just means
Yeah.
I'm not an 18-year-old boy anymore. But that's the real problem is
I was getting to that. We are getting old faster. And I don't know, like every time it's 11 p.m., I'm like, okay, my brain is dying now and I need some rest. That's it. And I just crash. That's all.
exactly, and you end up not accomplishing your goals for the day.
Exactly. Especially, the biggest thing that I'm not able to do is going to the gym or working out. I'm like, oh, when do I go? When do I do that? So that's the biggest thing that's not doing the best. I'm not doing best at keeping my health well.
Yep, yep. You're like, I'm gonna go tomorrow, and then you don't, and then it's a month later. You're like, damn, I forgot.
Exactly. Cool. Vincent, so I know you, but I'm sure that a lot of people who are here on a channel and who are viewing us live on X are seeing you for the first time on our YouTube channel or on our social media. So why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, cool. Hi, my name is Vincent. I'm a DevRel at Trunk, but I met Hementika when we were both doing DevRel work at AppWrite. I don't know. I'm really into like all kinds of writing related things, UX writing, technical writing. Yeah, I've been doing this for a surprisingly long time, since 2019, and yeah, I don't know. It's just something I really like talking about.
Oh, wow,
Oh,
5.
actually, I do have a shout out. If anybody is in North America is interested in technical writing, we're hiring.
Oh, wow, this
Yeah.
is new. Anybody who's listening us for the first time or who are just joining in, we will also maybe bring this up towards the end of the stream that I guess it's Trump that is hiring for technical writers. So
Yep.
if you want a referral, just go ahead and DM Vincent. That's where you can get your referrals.
Yep. We're trying to fill the role pretty fast. So
Oh wow, that's pretty nice. Cool. So I think I'll just we'll have a chat, but then I'll be the one who is shooting a lot of questions at you because a lot of times, or let's say most of the things that I know today are from your writings and from the guidelines that you have written. So I'll just be the one who's listening and maybe adding a point or two. But you mentioned about UX writing, you mentioned about technical writing. So let's start with the first question first. That our audience is highly developer audience or people who are just getting started in the career. So
hmm
maybe you can talk a little bit about what are the career options that one has in technical writing, what are the different types of writing that one can do, anything just to get started.
yeah, I think the whole idea of technical writing is you have a product that you've built for developers, right? And for that product to succeed, I think for in any scalable way, of course, there's marketing, there's sales, there's DevRel, but the self-serve experience for any developer product has to be really great, because there's two facts to this. One is that any human related focused support or like any hand-holding you had to do to onboard a developer is not scalable. That's the first problem. The second problem is that developer likes to not have their hands held. They like to self-serve themselves. Even when there are great resources and people offering, hey, do you want to hop on a call? Let's talk about this. I'll help you walk through this. They will 100% not take that offer as long as they can read the documentation and do it themselves. So it's really important for a lot of this to happen. And it turns out, if you're the person who's writing the software and making the software and doing the code, you end up having a pretty, even if you think you know the product better, you end up writing worse documentation because you know too much. And that's where sort of technical writers came in, right? You need a third person's perspective to write good documentation. You need someone to really specialize in this, because there's a lot of things you pick up along the way about how to write good docs. And so if you want to get into technical writing, there's a lot of cool things you can do. You can end up in developer relations, developer advocacy. You can obviously end up in doing technical writing. There's a lot of technical, like dedicated technical writer roles, and you can pivot into things like developer experience engineering, or my favorite is I've also seen a lot of technical writers end up going into product work, like product management. I came from product management, so it's a lot of like adjacent fields you end up.
Yeah. So I feel that this role definitely has a lot of scope, and there are multiple roles that you can go into. Like maybe after 5 years or 10 years, if you're bored of just writing, just move into a different role. So you'll have a lot of options open for you. That being said, I am also monitoring the comments. So we have a comment for you from Nandini, and she's asking that why is this background blur kind? I know this is a real background, so do you want to answer that?
The real reason is because I was cooking this morning before a stream, and my kitchen is really messy. If you go watch my other videos on our trunk channel, you'll see that I usually clean it up before I do anything. The real answer is that housing is extremely expensive in Toronto. I have a 1-bedroom and I work out of the kitchen.
That's nice. The food is in the kitchen. Plus, those of you are knowing Vincent for the first time, he cooks really well, and he also has a cooking channel.
I like have my coffee set up right behind me. I have my espresso press right here. You know, I don't even have to get up for me to make more coffee for myself.
Yeah. So we already have a question for you. What were you cooking? I know he was making coffee, but I don't know what he was cooking.
I made some braised meats. Yeah, that's what I was doing. I was braising some pork. Actually, I think I know who this is. This is
I know who this is.
you know who he is as well, right?
Yes. We also have
This
Aditya
is
in the
Richard.
chat
Yeah.
saying hi to us.
Well,
Cool.
hello. I
I should.
I haven't seen Aditya in a while. I think I'm gonna after this I'm gonna pop into Appright's office hours and just hang out for a bit.
Yeah, definitely the same time. Cool. So we have the first question and the answer out already. That's about how to get started in technical writing and the career trajectory, how that looks like. And it's looking really, really good. So anybody who is looking to become a technical writer and you want any suggestions, the best person I know who you can reach out to is Vincent. And we also have Richard in the chat who just interned at Appright as a technical writer. So if you have any DMs, you can also reach out to him.
Yep.
Great. So one thing that I really like, but I know Vincent, you are the best person to talk about it, is about developer experience. And there's so many, not controversies, but tweets and posts that goes live about how people saying that if you write good documentation, half of your developer experience work is done there. So would you like to maybe talk a little bit about that how do you actually make sure that your products or the developer experience is well defined, especially through documentation?
Yeah, I feel like one of the most common pitfalls I've seen now that I've hopped a couple of different teams is that if you haven't had a technical writer own the docs, what tends to happen is the documentation becomes a smattering of someone implements something, they throw something in the docs. and someone makes something else and they keep throwing things onto the docs. And what it feels like is you've taken individual pieces and you've taped them together into a ball. So like if you need a screwdriver, a hammer, and like a wrench in one thing, instead of really thinking about how to put those things together into one tool, what ends up happening is they get duct taped together and they feel awful to use all around. And really what the problem is good documentation needs to sort of be in line with how you've defined the experience for your developers. What I mean by this is that there are distinct journeys that a developer takes when using your product, and the documentation is really there not just to define this is all of the facts and how to use this product, is also how we think you should be using the product, and we should be nudging them towards taking, when you follow the hierarchy of a good piece of documentation, it should
Exactly.
start and end in places where we expect you to take that journey. And then all of the little detours and side quests and weird settings should be purposefully made less, I don't want to say less obvious, but it should be purposely taken later in the navigation so that like you have a more natural flow. And that's really what ends up happening is when you write good docs, you end up thinking a lot about the experience that you're guiding them through. And when it's really awkward to document something and you can't describe exactly why or how they should be doing something, it means your product is crap. And like
Yeah.
that process of having a person really own documentation and take a lot of time to think about it helps your entire team reflect on the product. And that's why like I think a lot of people say like if you have good docs, half of your DX is done. It's more like if you have good DX, it's really easy to write docs and vice versa, right? Like
Absolutely. So you mentioned, like about the thinking part, and what I do, like I'm writing the docs at Hashnode, and what I've done is like I put myself in the shoes of the developer or the user who is using a product, and I'm like, if I'm using this product for the first time, or like I see it in two ways, one as an end user and one as the person within the company, that whenever I'm using the product, what are some of the things that I would like to know about the product. And like you mentioned, like there's a journey, the developer journey, we are the ones who define it, the technical writers, and we are the ones who write it. So what is there any um, thinking approach that you follow while you are mentioning, or while you are, let's say, strategizing the docs part? Like is there any maybe design thinking or anything that you work around on Figma or any other tools, and anything that you do that helps you in shaping up how the docs for that company will look like?
yeah, there's DevRel agency has had this thing called the developer journey float around everywhere for a while now. I actually met I can't remember her name. I'm so sorry, but I met her during DevRel Con recently in New
Caroline,
York. Huh?
Caroline, the one who wrote
Yeah,
the
yeah, 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 yeah. And it's a
alum.
great way to think about things because really, I've come to believe that the details that you put in the docs are trivial to get right, because any engineer can get it right. The problem and the difficult part is getting the navigation and the flow of a piece of documentation right, and that takes a understanding of your product's developer journey. I think that mapping out developer journey in the sense that you need to think about the different stages of a developer's learning, right? So you need to think about the fact that documentation should take someone through the discovery of a product, like to know what your product is. It should take you through evaluating the product. Like there should be information in the documentation that tells you when it is appropriate to use this product and how you know this product is a good fit for you. Because it's useless to take someone down a journey to learn your thing if they don't know if it's good for them yet. And responsible developers will want that information anyway. And then
Exactly.
it's good to think about the different stages of learning and building with your product. When you learn a product, there's two different stages before you do anything useful with it. Someone usually spins up like a hacky side weekend project type thing where
Yeah.
they learn the product through building something useless, like your hello world. Everybody, writes a hello world ish example for whatever they're learning. And it's useful to think of it, through the different stages of a journey as like you learn something with it, you learn a product, you build something with it, and then you skill with it. during the learn phases, that's when the developer is most optimistic and most likely to get excited that they've gotten something done. But it's also the stage where they have the least tolerance for confusion or for a poor experience. And what's really cool that you can do during that phase is give them a very linear journey, which
Absolutely.
means like your journey should take the developer from A to B with exact instructions and lots of little wins so that they feel confident that like, hey, I can actually do something useful with it. And more towards the end of the journey, so like through build and especially scale, you need to describe things instead of giving them a linear journey. You need to give them a lot of facts for them to make their own guided decisions. And so I think the real thought process is to think through these stages of someone's journey, really take down what they should know about, the information they should know about, the information that they need to care about, and then design your docs around that. And you'll see a big improvement in sort of general experience.
Yeah, very, very true. Because this reminds me that a lot of products that before I started writing, a lot of products I ended up using, let's say, I used to use Twilio a lot over other alternatives. And the main reason is because it gave us that instant win. Like I need to, if I need to integrate SMS or if I need to integrate the phone integration, it becomes so easy because the examples that they have is just easy to follow. You can just plug and play, just do everything, and it becomes so easy. So if you know, like this term called time to hello world, right? And the easiest or the shortest time that is, the better docs you have, and the easier it is to onboard developers.
Yeah.
So we have a compliment from you from Nandini, and she mentions that your eyes light up when you're explaining about technical writing stuff, which is
Of
true.
course. Of course. It's the most exciting topic.
Absolutely. Just on that note, I mentioned to Vincent that hey, we're doing, with this webinar, and as soon as I mentioned that we're doing it on technical writing and documentation, he's like, yeah, count me in, and then he didn't even have to check his calendar. That's usually the kind of response I was expecting. That oh, I need to check my calendar, but then he's like, yeah, just count me in.
Yeah, no problem. No, a part of it is to help a friend out, but a part of it is like also this is like in the
Of course.
morning, and our our it's funny. I work Pacific time hours because I'm lazy and I don't want to get up. But that also means like this is technically my free time. It's great. No,
Okay,
why wouldn't you want to go on a little webinar about docs, right? Most exciting
absolutely.
topic.
That reminds me, I know this is a very cliche questions that most developer advocates or technical writers ask each other, but I'll still ask you. And now this is challenge that don't take the name of Stripe, but mention what are your favorite documentation of dev tools or any technical companies that you know of.
Huh. So not Stripe. Um, there's
Maybe
actually a
top
lot of
three without Stripe.
yeah. I think what I've been really favoring recently has been um, what so there's this is going to be controversial. I really like Datadog's documentation.
Yeah,
It's controversial because Datadog's documentation, if you take a look at it, is a giant mess of a thing. They have so many products. Their product range is so incredibly wide. But the reason that I've really come to like Datadog's documentation is for the exact reason. Even though they have so many different products, I can get to any of the pages that I need within 3 levels of navigation. They've done a really good job in keeping it flat enough so that within 3 clicks through the navigation, not through the search. Their search is great too. I can get to what I need, and it's community owned. Um, that's one of the pieces of documentation that I have a lot of respect for. Is it the best experience? No, I think Datadog should be like 50 different companies, and you'd have a better experience if they all had their individual docs. But even compared to Stripe, I do believe Datadog has a superior navigation structure because Stripe's documentation, as great as it is, has ballooned out of proportion. If you go look at Stripe's documentation right now, what you'll notice is they have a lot of categories. They have getting started, they have payments, they have finance automation, they have platform marketplace, banking as a service, developer tools. and then their
Yeah,
API and SDK docs are all the way hidden to the right. And if you scroll down, they have like no code, Stripe hosted for developers, and all of this stuff. I think it's too much.
exactly. But I think even the product is growing at this point. It's growing a lot.
Yeah, yeah.
Since we are
And
the topic, oh, so yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
another piece of documentation I really like. I don't know if you've heard of this product. It's called AppWrite. You can go check it out. Really cool open source Firebase alternative, and their documentation is really good. I don't know why it's so good.
I knew that was coming. And for people who are watching us for the first time, that's because let's say 98% of it, or even 100% of it, was written by Vincent. So kudos to him. And yeah, it's really nice.
Yeah,
So it's like
it's
I have heard of it.
Richard has written most of the new content on AppWrite stocks after I left, but
Oh,
yeah,
that's
no,
nice.
it's great. It's my baby, so
Even
I'm
Aditya is,
biased.
I hear you. That reminds, since we're on the topic of documentation and favorite ones, one documentation that I really like is of Microsoft as well. Like they're huge. They have so many products, but it's so easy to use. And one thing that I really like the most is them having sandbox environment within docs. I think that's a
Yeah,
great experience, and especially for companies where you need to go through the credit card hell, like to sign up, you need to have your credit card and blah blah blah. It's such a bad experience. But if you get to use the product for free or with some credits within the documentation where they have everything, it's the best experience.
yeah. There's another close one that I really like. It's Shatsian's UI's documentation. Um, what I think they've done really well is the whole purpose of Shatsian is for you to be able to copy paste and make something pretty really fast, and that's exactly what they've done. It's so it's so simple. There's only one level of navigation. You never see nested navigation. You just see a list of components when you open it, how to install it, how to copy paste and make something look pretty, and they don't bother with like giving you a ton of details, which is kind of an issue when you want to like customize the components further. But I think as soon as you start to really customize and like dig into a component, Shatsian is no longer what you should be reaching for anyway. And I think they've just done a like really great job in making that initial journey really, really successful.
Absolutely. I love the way that Versal and even Shatsi and they write the docs. It's like simple and it gives you all the information, and like you mentioned, like it's built
It's
to the simple.
opinionated
Yeah,
in that it's overly simple, but they know their
true.
audience.
Exactly. Oh, since we are in the topic of dogs and favorite dogs and how to write it, I think it's a perfect moment to also mention that at Hashnode we launched our own dogs product, which means that if you would like to write docs for your company or for even for yourself, like if you own something or if you're writing just noting down things as dogs, you can do that. So what I'll do is, Vincent, I'll just spare you from questioning for a few minutes, and I'll show the product around, and maybe you can also give your, expressions, or you can ask questions to me, what you think about the product, your feedback, anything. And everybody here who is in the comment section, I see Aditya, I see Richard and Nandini. If you all have any questions or any comments or anything that you want to ask to me for about the product, you're more than free to do that. So for the next 10 minutes or maybe 15 minutes, I'll show us how our product looks right now. And just give me a second. You'll see a lot of, oh, I don't have a slide, but you'll see lot of things on my desktop because I'm just using one laptop at a time. Share my entire screen and you should be able to see Hashnode. Oh, I have done that. Okay. Vincent, is it all good?
Yep. Yep. Yep.
Perfect. So for those of you who are seeing Hashnode for the first time after we revamped our UI, so this whenever you type hashnode.com and sign in, this is how it looks like right now. And we have two main products, which is our blog and which is our docs. With the blog, it can be your normal blog that you sign up on Hashnode and start writing, and it also can be your Hashnode, headless blog, very similar to the one that I made here. Your UI, everything yours, but powered by Hashnode. But here the hero feature is our dogs, and you'll see that I have a few dogs right here. But it's very simple, just a few clicks. You click on new dogs, you give it a name, maybe webinar dogs, and I'll just write it as webinar. If you want, you can update a logo, else you can keep it as it is, and you click on create. And you'll see that your new documentation is ready. Before I show you how to add the guides and sections and everything, one part that I really love is the dashboard. And especially us, like somebody like us who also needs to measure KPIs and everything, my favorite part here is, like if you go there, there's analytics and everything that you can check out. So, oops, what I'll do here is this is analytics part that you can see. And since we just created this part, you won't see any analytics, but you can basically check out the number of views, how, where are the people coming your dogs from, like is it really from Google search, or is it from your ad, or whatever it is, which country has the highest number of developers who are referring to your dogs, operating system, browsers, and there's a whole lot of information that you can gather. And I think this is really helpful because devil teams or the technical writer team, we spend a lot of time writing the docs, and when it comes to explaining the ROI that we have or the metrics that we are counting, and analytics like this really helps. What do you think, Vincent?
I think there's a couple of things that strike me here is that a a lot of the initial setup for a lot of teams is annoying. Like having to set up things like Plausible or some other form of analytics is annoying to do by yourself. And another really interesting thing that I think struck me about Hashnode stocks is that eventually what you end up doing is you need to connect whatever self-hosted version of documentation website you have to some form of CDN anyway. And there's a lot of really cool things that having a product that like this that's owned by Hashnode gives you, is that you can have a lot of that integration there already instead of having to build it out yourself. And especially for teams that can't justify building their own docs, like I think it has everything that you need, right? Like you need analytics to start, you need documentation, you need a blog, and it needs to be backed by something that that
Exactly.
that delivers your content over a server instead of being like serving static content over whatever web server you have. It becomes really messy. So
Absolutely. And another part that I really like is, like you can host it on your subdomain, and all that it takes is just code. So the dashboard I feel is really powerful. Like you can do everything that you want within the dashboard, and you just need to like have your domain here and you can map it. And it's just
yeah,
not for the docs, it's similar for the blogs as well. Like ever
yeah,
since Hashnode had its own blog, even before the headless mode, you could just go there and you can have it. And
yeah,
another feature that I really love is the headless mode. So, what I've seen in most companies is that if you're not building it in house, your docs have a very different experience from your landing page. Like your landing page is beautiful, but your docs, especially if you're using a tool, it looks like the same format or the same theme that they have. But if you're using headless mode, you can just go ahead and build with your own UI. So that's something, especially as a part of the experience, I think it's really, really useful.
yeah. Does that mean you're using Hashnode like a CMS?
Yes, yes, exactly. Yeah, we're
That's
a headless
yeah,
CMS.
exactly. That's amazing.
Absolutely. Cool. And since this we are on the free tire, what I'll do is I'll go to our Hashnode docs. It's still a work in progress, but I'll just show you one thing, which is this AI search. So we built this in-house, by the way, and what we have is like you just need to turn this toggle off. Like since I had already turned it on, and you just need to turn it on, and you need to write some questions like the onboarding questions that people have on their docs, and it could be like what is Hashnode, what are the different products you have, and you need to add 3 questions minimum. This will be fed from the docs, and then it will be automatically updated whenever you're updating your docs. And I would like to show a quick demo. So what I'll do is I'll go back to hashnode.com, and I'll go to our docs here, and you see that we have the search. here, and this ask AI, it shows up as a research assistant. And one of the main reasons why I like it is because, especially if you have any questions, you can just ask it here, and you don't need to go to Stack Overflow or a lot of forums and communities. Most of the basic questions related to docs can be asked or answered here. I love this one. What do you think about this, Vincent?
Yeah, I think that's the direction documentation will end up heading in, whether we like it or not. Is that with a lot of these, with sort of how great generative AI has become, and especially is going to become, I think a lot of what writing documentation will become in the future is
Mhm.
you're really trying to figure out a way to describe the information to be somewhat human readable, but more importantly than anything else, to be properly labeled so that like a piece you can feed it to an LLM and have it spit out the answers that you want. Because searching and asking questions is always a more intuitive experience than reading, especially for our next generation of people
Exactly,
who
exactly.
grows up with
Yeah. I think
ChatGPT.
especially with short form of content and everything, the maximum constitution span that even we have is 30 seconds to a minute. And rather, as painful it is for me to mention that, but most people do not read the entire docs and they just want quick solution. So that's when something like this is really helpful. And one last thing that I'll show here is, so we have these guides, and you just can create a new guide, or you can also create an API reference. I'll show the API reference part and the new guides, and I'll just end it because there's so much that I can show. So what we have is basically a one-click open API spec importer. What I'll do is I'll just find the pet store Swagger UI, and this is basically the JSON or the API URL that you have. Just copy it, go ahead and paste it here, and give it some name, maybe pet store, and you can have a slug. And when you click on import and create, it's right there. And it also has, like your entire API documentation or your API reference is created in just a few minutes, along with an API, like a playground. So that this is something that I really like, especially when it comes to importing docs from one platform to other. This is really useful.
Yep, yep. And I think that it's one of the most annoying parts to implement if you end up implementing your own site. Um,
Yeah.
there's a lot of tools that helps you sort of build this if you want to build your own in whatever tool you're building. And most open source documentation frameworks have a plugin for this, but it's just annoying. Like it's just so annoying. There are so many cases and edge cases that you need to consider, and you'll run into, and you'll probably spend most of the time addressing bugs with how you're parsing open API specs, especially if you also need to support more legacy versions of old Swagger specs or old, because there's been generations of open API specs, and it's just so annoying. Yeah.
Exactly. And one last thing that I would show is the editor, or anybody who has already used Hashnode, you know that we have a markdown editor. And so basically just you just write markdown, you use oops, like two hashtags, and you have heading two. And we also have AI that is inbuilt. So if you want to maybe summarize a page, generate code or whatever, you can do that with Hashnode AI. And we also have latex support. Plus, we also rolled out mermaid support, mermaid chart support recently. So there's a
Nice.
lot of things that you can do, but just for the sake of this webinar, I'll keep it short, and I'll send this landing page with all the information and the key features in the chat. So you all can check that out. And with that, I'll stop sharing my screen. Cool. So Richard has mentioned that he uses Storybook, but it's still annoying to set up and write. Richard, you know what to use right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Nandini was mentioning that can your AI translate the docs if they are in a different language? Yes, we can, but like we don't have a button on for that yet. Like you translate to English or translate to Japanese or something like that. We don't have that yet, but that's a good thing that we can do.
Yeah,
And Aditya mentioned that, Ahmedika, can you also observe user journeys through this? No, not yet, but this is something like, if you mention, if you saw that in our dashboard, we have this integration part, and we already have Google Analytics and a lot of those integrations already there, and we plan to build more. So that's where you can probably see all of those things. I'm not sure if we'll provide that out of the box yet, but through integrations, definitely. What is the LLM model that the AI search is using? As far as I know, we are using a GPT-4o. So that's something that we are using, but we might be changing to a different model as well. We'll keep you all
it's gonna get expensive.
possibly. Cool. So that's all for the comments, if I remember. Okay, that's all. So now, Vincent, back to you, to the questioning round. Now that I've covered like how the career looks like, how what kind of docs you like, how the developer experience, the journeys should look like, maybe you can have maybe 3 to 5 tips, if you can share, that you have for technical writers or for anybody who is starting to write, especially in professionally. If there's anything that you want to mention, like maybe in a startup, if they're starting their job and they're the ones who are responsible for writing the docs, like you have been. So any tips for anybody?
Yeah, it's quite interesting. I was chatting with Richard not too long ago about this. I have different tips for people with different backgrounds. If you grew up in an English-speaking country and you did quite well in English, I'm sorry for you, because that's going to be the hardest transition. One of the terrible things they do to you in North America, or I guess any English-speaking country, is that you learn to write in a very pretentious way that's very unnecessary. You what you end up doing is you use words that help prove to the teacher that you have a thorough understanding of the English language and you have a large vocabulary. But you should avoid doing that when writing documentation because, for one, it's the people reading your docs are not going to be all native English speakers. So as as soon as you start putting in words that's outside of a typical person's vocabulary of a few thousand words, 1 or 2,000 words, or at least the 1 or 2,000 words they use most commonly, what you end up doing is you make your documentation unnecessarily difficult to read. Even for someone with a large vocabulary, when they see a word that is really fancy and you've used it somewhere in the documentation, they'll look at it and they're like, ah, this is a fancy word. And they'll start going through their brain. It's like, I don't see this word often. I know what this means. I think I might have to look it up. When was the last time I saw this word? Is this the correct use of the word? And like that's how our brain naturally thinks when we see a word that's not commonly seen. We turn on our English class mode, and that distracts people from reading your docs. So yeah, that's one of the first things I'd say. The second thing I'd say is that if you're not a native English speaker, embrace tools like Grammarly and avoid tools like ChatGPT. Um, I've noticed this, and I think a lot of people concur with me in the sense that like ChatGPT writes like a middle-aged North American white person, like a very specific tone that you notice, and it has to do with a lot of things, probably the data that it's trained on. And I really think that's unfortunate because if you use a lot of ChatGPT, you sound unnecessary. The language that you use is unnecessarily proper in the sense that there's too many filler words. The sentence structures are too full and complete and sometimes conversational. And what you want in docs is to describe exactly what you want to describe with as few words as possible, even if it's
Yeah.
not technically correct in in the sense that it might not even be perfectly grammatically correct, but that's not what you're going for, right? Like you want to keep the words as short as possible so people can like get through your documentation, run as much of it as possible. The third thing I would mention is that you also want to throw out your paragraph and sentence structures as much as possible,
Yeah.
in the sense that instead of thinking what would be the proper way to structure this paragraph or structure this sentence, think about it this way. Someone will probably scan the first line of a paragraph first to determine if this paragraph is useful for them. And for sentences, they'll scan the first two words, the middle two words, and the end two words.
Yeah.
So what you want to do is you want to concentrate the most useful information near the start of each paragraph and the start of each sentence. Sometimes what that means is your paragraph structure is not proper and your sentence structure isn't proper and it reads terribly. It doesn't flow well and whatever it is. But you have to remember your goal is to have people skim through the first line of each paragraph and be able to get through it and understand what they've read. So keep your
Exactly.
paragraphs a lot shorter than they need to. Sometimes my paragraphs are like 1 or 2 sentences, and you'd get a slap on the wrist by a teacher for like, you know,
You give me flashbacks of our English classes. I see Aditya and also Richard commenting about that because I guess all our lives we have been taught to write fancy words. Sometimes I read my essays from when I was 15 or 16, and there was so many difficult words which I don't recall anymore, by the way. And I was like, oh, why did I even write that? It's so unnecessary. So we have all been there. And the funniest thing is that as somebody like us who are in India or who has been dominated by the British a few centuries back or something, we have been writing and speaking in British English, but whenever you're writing your docs, it should be in US English. So that's also a transition that a lot of us has to make, especially with spellings. That oh, do we use the U? Do we not use the U? Is it an S or
yeah,
is it a
yeah,
Z? So there's so many things to keep in mind that it can become really difficult at times, and that's where I feel like Vincent mentioned tools like Grammarly can really help. And one thing that I also use Hashnode's AI for is like we have this translate into US English or fix spelling and grammar, so that way I don't even need to
yeah,
use other tools to check if I'm correct or not.
yeah. And again, if you just keep your word choices, the words that you choose to use very simple, you can dodge that whole problem. We've had this happen very often actually when I speak to when I work with Aditya as well. A lot of times, he'd write a blog, and there would be some words that I'm sure are like it's very uh, would be understood by a lot of people in let's say India. And those words and the way that it's used, I would look at it and like I have never in my life seen this word used in this way. And
Yeah.
but what I find is that usually it's with a lot of more fancier versions of a word that where a simpler version would be understood by everyone. And that's another thing to keep in mind is that if you go to Malaysia and Singapore, for example, a lot of the words that they'll use like habitually, even though it's still English, and you'd understand them, you'd be like weird, and you don't want that happening, right? For your audience. And we have a lot of colloquialisms in Canada and the US as well, right? So it's almost what I find that is that if you don't speak English as your native language, sometimes you end up writing better docs because you just naturally gravitate towards simpler sentence structure and simpler words.
Absolutely. I think since you were mentioning about the fancy word part, and we also talked about ChatGPT or other AI tools, and what I've seen is that most AI tools they end up using very fancy words or a lot of jargons, which actually like these are words that you know the meaning about, but then when it's there in the sentence, it makes no sense or it's just too hard to read. So
Oh,
that's the kind of view that I have about AI tools in general as well.
yep, yep.
So but since we're the topic of AI and then also in dogs, so do you feel that it can maybe help documentation in some way? If yes, what are some of the ways that you see it helping? Maybe generating code, or like we saw an example of the AI search that it can really help you escalate support. So, what are some of
Yep.
the other things that you feel that documentation and AI can be helpful in?
So I believe AI is you can treat AI like an intern, a technical writing intern that you've hired for very cheap amounts of money and with government subsidies. So like basically you're paying nothing to have them there. And they would be happy to do anything for experience. They're very eager, but they don't always do a very good job, especially if you give them lots of decisions they have to make on their own. So what I end up doing the most is there are certain things that's extremely annoying for you to do. For example, I give you a list of things, especially I give you a paragraph of things, or I give you a stack trace or an output from a CLI of things, and you have to document that. Especially if I tell you to document it using a markdown table, all of a sudden you've just come upon the most annoying task in life you can imagine. Because if you've ever written markdown tables, it's infuriating. But
It
what I
is.
really love doing is I love taking the output of a CLI tool, like you run a command line tool, like I don't know, like trunk check dash H, and it gives you like all of the command line options. Feed that to a piece of AI and tell them to turn it into a table and document it. They do a very good job most of the time, and it takes you a fraction of the time as if you were to write all of that yourself, because it's defined scope. They don't have to generate or dream up or hallucinate any new content. They're just transforming it from one format to another, and you can do it without writing your own parser. Like, it's great. Another thing that I really like doing is that sometimes I will take one piece of poorly formatted, poorly written piece of writing or notes that I've taken during my meetings with someone else, and I tell
Mhm.
it, turn this into markdown and turn this into documentation. I give them an example of what our docs typically look and sound like, and they'll
Yeah.
do that. You're going to need a second pass to really figure out if it's done a good job. Sometimes it does a really poor job, but it's a lot faster. And my other favorite thing to do is, I remember at Apprite when we moved from PHP for our docs to Markdown based docs. Um, and one of the most annoying things to do is to translate one format that's well defined to another format. If you do it with
Mhm.
just doing it by yourself takes too long. ChatGPT or Claude or whatever you end up using does a fantastic job of translating one way of structuring text to another way of structuring text. So I think, in my opinion, that the best ways to use chat, like any form of generative AI right now, is to use it as your intern. That's you can trust it with menial tasks that doesn't have a lot of decision making components, but you can't, and you have to double check their work. But yeah, they're useful in that sense. Cheap labor. I don't know. That's
Uh,
the way I
I
think.
think the example was really funny, but then yeah, I totally agree with you. Like, especially AI tools, they're great with structuring, and this happens a lot with me, that I have very let's say unstructured content, and then I need to structure it, or like especially writing markdown tables is a great example that you mentioned. That has happened to me a lot of times, that oh, I have this, just structure it into markdown, and then I'll just go ahead and paste it. So yeah, those are really nice examples. So there is my colleague favorite who mentioned that AI equals to cheap labor, which is,
Exactly what I was going to say. Yeah. Um,
if we have to word it nicely, I would say research assistant, but then it's basically the same thing.
Same thing. Research assistant is not cheap labor; it's unpaid labor. That's even worse. Like,
Yeah, at least we are paying ChatGPT if we are using the paid subscription.
yeah, yeah.
Exactly. Cool.
Doesn't have
So
a family to feed.
yeah, exactly. And then we can just pay it a little amount monthly, and then they are good.
Yep, yep.
Cool. So one thing that we are almost towards the end of the stream, but Vincent, is there anything that you want to mention? Any last tips or anything that I didn't ask you, but you thought that you might have mentioned about it?
We're hiring, but that's not the actual thing that I was going to say. What I would say is that um, I think it's really unique to have Hashnode, which does a lot of things with blogs and CMS related products, to also come out with a documentation related product. Because I think if you're starting your own startup, there are certain pieces of tech that you can take on, and there's certain pieces of that you can't tech debts that you can't afford to take on yet. And documentation, I feel like, is one of them. And have
Sure.
you're going to be right. If you're making developer products, you will be writing blogs, you will need a CMS for various things, and you will need good documentation. Having all of them in one place is just great. Like it's one of those things that needs to be amazing, but especially in the beginning, it just needs to work. You need to not waste a ton of time on it, and I think
Exactly.
Hashnode will help you get there. But also we're hiring.
Thanks, Vincent, for the shout out. And I absolutely agree. Like, this is one thing that we have been trying to solve at Hashnode, that your documentation should be as dynamic as your code. And there's like, the moment you're shipping something, it should be documented, and it shouldn't be a hard task for you to get started or for you to, write your documentation. Especially, like most documentation that companies do, it needs to go through, let's say, multiple PR reviews and then comments on Discord, and there is no two-way sync, or then there is no inline commenting that's present in Notion, and even on Hashnode, or real-time collaborative experiences. So these things, I feel, when they're clubbed together, it makes the entire process so easy. And when there are non-technical members in the team who needs to document, but then they cannot because there's so many other things that they need to know, eh, that's when a product like Hashnode does really help. And since Vincent already mentioned, and Richard is also mentioning that I can work with Vincent, it's a good time to mention that Trunk is hiring for technical writers based out of North America. So just feel free to reach out to Vincent, and he'll be the one who can add more about the role.
Definitely. All
Cool.
right.
With that, we will end the stream, and thank you everybody who joined and hang around with us. It was a lot of fun. And also thank you so much, Vincent, for agreeing to be on this webinar. It's always fun for me to catch up with you, and we'll probably see again each other on Twitter, on social media, and just be there to collaborate.
Of course. I'll talk to you later.
Yes, thank you. Bye bye.